Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our first panel for our World Rainforest Day Summit 2022. I am pleased to be here with all of our lovely panelists who are joining us from different places in the world for this panel on fighting forest crime. As we know, especially with the last news that have circled around internationally due to the assassinations of Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira, more than ever, it is very important to showcase the solutions that can also be used to protect rainforests around the world. Whether it's from cell phones to satellites, tech is playing a pivotal role in identifying, halting, and preventing illegal activity like logging, poaching, and illegal gold mining. This is no easy mission. We are faced with millions of acres of vast, remote, and dense terrain. It is a task that brings together data scientists, law enforcement professionals, ecologists, engineers, and much more. For an inside look at how exactly tech is being deployed and utilized in places like the Amazon, Africa, Southeast Asia, Kenya, we'll be joined by those at the forefront of fighting forest crime. We are today joined by Jan Kees Schakel, founder director of Sensing Clues, John Beavers, executive director of the Amazon Conservation Association, Tim Boekhout van Solinge, founder and director of Forest Forces, and Felipe Espina Avino, senior conservation analyst at WWF Brazil. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd love to first start with some quick introductions. So please, Jan Kees, if you could please introduce yourself, your organization, and tell me a little bit about the last work that you've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello all. My name is Jan Kees. I represent Sensing Clues Foundation. We work on 4 continents to help protected area managers with protecting their areas. And we do that by providing them with data-driven solutions. The question why is because green law enforcement, like any other law enforcement question, starts and ends with collecting data. It starts with what has happened on the ground. Is it legal? Is it not? Can we prove it? And in the end, of course, do you have sufficient data to act, to prosecute, to warn, to fine, or even better, to take measures to prevent the offense from happening by, for example, changing the risk reward balance or investing on alternative livelihoods, things that have been discussed in our sessions as well. The way we do it is we are a non-profit foundation. We work with about 15 pro bono corporations that support us with their technologies, with their consultants. And we have about 20 volunteers, professional volunteers in law enforcement, in eco-science, in ecology and data science, but also, of course, in IT to build solutions that matter. And when we talk about solutions, we actually are focusing on 3 areas: the green, so-called green law enforcement, supporting rangers with technologies to monitor the area and to respond quickly to things that are happening on the ground, biodiversity monitoring, and human wildlife conflict preventions. And these 3 in the field are often very much intertwined. The people living around forested areas or nature conservation areas are often confronted with conflicts. It's a conflict between competition for land, for soil, for resources, and laws are there to prevent both people and the animals, and laws are also broken often. We support organizations in Africa, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And the last project we did actually with that show was in the Javari, very much in the news, of course, lately. It's in the Amazon, near Peru and Colombia. And there we did a biodiversity threat assessment. What is there actually? How is it happening? What are the major threats towards the biodiversity? And biodiversity is a broad term. It includes the people that live there because Javari is a very special area. It's the size of Portugal, almost 85,000 square kilometer. And there's many people there living which are uncontacted tribes, uncontacted people, a few thousand. And it's very pristine, very well preserved so far. But of course, also with quite a lot of problems because it's the law is far away, the law enforcement officers are far away, and there's lots of intruders. So we will go into that probably later in the discussion. But working on these topics is what we do.
Thank you, Jan Kees. John, can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. My name is John Beavers. I'm the executive director of the Amazon Conservation Association. I've been working in conservation in Latin America for the past almost 25 years now, a vast majority of that in Central America, where I was living and working for close to 20 years. And presently, as the executive director for Amazon Conservation, where I'm focused on basically the Amazon. Our organization is really an alliance of three sister organizations. We are in Peru, where we got our start over 20 years ago. Our organization is known as ACA there. And in Bolivia, we are ASEA. And then we are ACA here in Washington, D.C. Our focus since we started over 20 years ago has been in the entire Amazon region of Peru, especially around the Madre de Dios region, all of the Bolivian Amazon. And we are going wider and deeper under our new strategy for all of the areas of the Amazon in both countries and also across the entire Amazon. Basically, are an organization that's been working on the ground this entire time. We are focused on three things. One is what we call protecting wild places, which is focused on basically supporting and helping create protected areas, whether it's national parks, regional parks, the rest, supporting indigenous territories, concessions, and other legal means for being able to manage and conserve territory. We do this through three principal means. One is through what we call empowering people, which is supporting the what we call governance, which is the ability of local communities to be able to manage and protect their lands and resources, which is a major part of what we're talking about today. And it's also the economic development to help build a sustainable forest-based economy across the Amazon. The other piece, we have a very strong science and technology piece, which has also been part of our history. We have on the ground biological stations in Peru, one of the world's first conservation concessions as well there, where we do a lot of science. We're developing something called the Amazon Observatory, which focuses on science across that entire region of shared between Bolivia and Peru and beyond. We also, our big focus has been satellite real-time monitoring, which is also part of the bigger discussion today, and focus on that for a second here. So our focus in terms of fighting forest crimes is through what we call governance and our program called MOP. MOP is the acronym for Monitoring of the Andes Amazon Project, which was started over 7 years ago. And so our governance program works in this way. There are three key pillars. The first is bringing real-time monitoring to people across the entire Amazon. So over this period of time, we've been able to take the technology that's out there and be able to develop a way that we can see forest-based crimes or environmental crimes across the Amazon, the entire Amazon, not just Bolivia and Peru anymore, but the entire Amazon. We can do it any day of the week, and we can do it down to 3 meters of resolution. So this has really revolutionized the ability of the other two pillars, which is first working with communities to improve their capacity to patrol from the sky, if you will, protect their lands, engage government to be able to apply the law, and working directly with governments to be able to support them to once again use this technology and begin to apply the law and enforce the law in a way that actually has real implications on the ground. We've had great success with this in Peru, and we're taking this program across the wider Amazon and are in Ecuador, starting a little bit in Brazil and the other places. Just very quickly, for us, the metrics of success in what we're trying to do is the bottom line is, are we actually reducing or halting illegal deforestation? And to get there, I think some of the sub-indicators of that success is the government taking action? Are local people able to really have the capacity to be able to defend themselves better, whether it's technologically and the rest in terms of their governance models? And of course, is there accessibility, is there cost effectiveness in real-time monitoring, really is helping take the control of those areas.
John, excuse me. I'm going to have to stop you there. Just a second.
It's going to be well over 7 years fighting. And
okay.
And 3 years ago, they called it hotspot for gold mines, the entire Amazon. 3 years later, we're at 96. That called Pampa.
Sorry for that, everyone. Technical problems there. I'm gonna jump into our next speaker. Please, Tim, if you could tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm sorry we're going to have to go a little bit quicker, but I'd love to have time to jump into the questions as well.
Yes. Thank you, Tatio. So my name is Tim Boekhout van Solingen. I'm originally from the Netherlands, so I lead Forest Forces Foundation, which is a foundation registered in the Netherlands, but we mostly work in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon. So I'm basically a scientist, criminologist, specialized in forest crime since 20 years. I've been giving many courses at universities about illegal logging and illegal deforestation and land grabbing. And Forest Forces Foundation basically is a neighborhood of a rainforest version, tropical rainforest version of Neighborhood Watch. So my partners are indigenous forest guardians who do the difficult work on the ground. They patrol the territories against to prevent and detect, but mostly to prevent illegal invasions and illegal exploitations, illegal forest activities. And we do this based on science, crime science, forest crime science, criminology, criminal justice studies, and especially situational crime prevention. So we apply insights of criminology. So I am the one who delivers the scientific expertise. I discuss this with the indigenous forest guardians, and we've gradually developed a best practice. Since 2015, we've been doing that as part of a scientific research. And we've managed to get, so I started in one indigenous territory, Maró indigenous territory, in Pará state, Brazil's leading deforestation state. And we've actually, and we managed together to get all logging companies out of indigenous territory. I can say this is one of the very few indigenous territories without the presence of logging companies and logging, because our combination of surveillance and our weapon, defense weapon, I should say, is the GPS camera, because the GPS camera registers the location of the crime. And we do this in state and federal. So we don't work with the government, but we the law enforcement and justice institutions that are independent of the government. And so this is a really, this works very well. They are very happy what we're doing, the law enforcement and the justice system actors. Also, the forest guardians are officially registered at the Federal Prosecutor's Office and at FUNAI, Federal Bureau for Indigenous Affairs. So we work according to the, let's say, the rules and the law enforcement system. So the indigenous collect proof of forest activities, illegal forest activities, and they transfer those data to the public prosecutors and other law enforcement actors. And to detect, it facilitates detection of forest crime, but the main goal is prevention. So it's a rainforest version of situational crime prevention. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Tim. John, sorry we lost you there. Good to have you back. I'm going to move into Felipe. Please, if you could tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi everyone. So I'm Felipe Espina from Brazil. I'm a conservation biologist for WWF Brazil. Not gonna talk much about WWF. We don't have much time, and I guess most of you know. WWF Brazil is sort of an independent organization. We've been working in Brazil for 15 years, and here I work in the science team, leading the work with conservation technologies, especially in the Amazon. So I really work more on the front line of conservation, a lot with indigenous forest defenders, forest guardians, training and giving to them the technology they need to be able to help them to monitor and defend their territory, or at least to try to do that, because in the current political situation in Brazil, it's harder than ever to be on the front line of conservation, especially the indigenous groups in the Amazon. And the way we do that is we work with multiple technologies. So we work from remote sensing and satellite information, but we also have training and work with the indigenous forest guardians with drones and mobile applications and remote communication systems to enable them to send the information back to the headquarters. And then once this information is received, we also have a legal and advocacy hub that deals with this information. And when it's the relevant case, it passes on to the public ministry or the relevant authorities. So we can try to force the authorities and the government to act, which is also very complex and hard at this moment in Brazil. But that's what I do. Of course, WWF has a more integrated approach. So we also work on the same regions, trying to generate income and work with many other ways to give them voice and ways to live sustainable and generate income from their livelihood and from the forests. So in a nutshell, that will be it.
Thank you, Felipe. Thank you, everyone, for those introductions. During your introductions, you mentioned the different ways in which you worked, the different methods that you use in your work, whether it's GPS cameras, whether it's satellite imagery, whether it's using cell phones. A question I have, the first question that I have actually for all of you, is how do you actually integrate all of these different methods? As Felipe was just saying at the end of his sentences, he was telling us the unified vision of using all of these different methods together. What is the best way to do this? And are there any examples of how you've done it? I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Felipe would be
Well,
great.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can help you. So in our case, and I think in many cases, there is not one single solution, one single technology that will solve all the problems. So oftentimes we have to deploy multiple technologies and have them contribute in different layers. So I'll give one example, the one I was already mentioned. So as you know, the Amazon is huge, the indigenous territories are huge. It's virtually impossible to monitor them from the ground in real time. So the first layer of information that we use is this real-time early detection system based on satellites. So we generate this sort of big picture at the landscape level, and then with that, we generate intelligence that will drive our field teams, our forest guardians, to the hotspots. And once they're there, they use other technologies such as mobile applications like Smart to gather field data. They use the drones to generate high quality maps. And also, they use the drones, for instance, to be far away from the danger and avoid direct confrontation. So the technology also has this side of adding a little bit of safety to those people in the front line of conservation. And then once they're back to the remote villages, they're in the middle of the forest, they need a way to send this information to the headquarters. So we built a low-cost remote communication system based on digital radio called Hermes that enable those community groups to send the information back to our headquarters, where then we will have the lawyers and the communication people to act on those information. So this is an example where we're using at least four different technologies: the satellite information, mobile applications, drones, and remote communication system, all integrated to enable to close this cycle from the field to the office.
John, this question is for you directly. Knowing the work that you do through MOP, for example, and satellite imagery, how much do you see the importance of being able to use technology directly on the ground, whether it's acoustics, whether it's drones, whether the examples that we've been saying, the importance of corroborating the information directly from the ground and using satellites as an entry level sometimes as well?
Yeah, well, maybe so I think Felipe did a good job of kind of giving the overall of like how the cycle of technology can be used. And I would just say that it really depends. I think there's two things here. One is really depends on what the people on the ground actually need, right? They need the imagery or whatever the detail is that says where this is taking place, enough evidence so they can move with the government and the rest. But what I would suggest on this is that technology is changing a lot, and what we need to get is the best possible information that shows the clear on the ground work. So to give you an example from our satellite monitoring that we've done, the resolution of satellites can go down now to like 0.5 meter. You can get very clear, and if you look on our MOP website, you can see where the machinery is, where the camps are, where the boats are, and all of those things. So I really feel like the level of technology is moving so quickly from satellites that it's getting to the point we've been able to do this in Peru and also in Ecuador, where that has been enough to move forward the people to either begin defending their territories or for government to begin to take action. And so, I think the evolution of things is happening very quickly, so that satellite imagery, and I'm not saying that we don't use other things, but you can get really good high quality images where that at some points is all that you actually need. Other times you do need more detail. You might need to go to drones. But I really feel like there's a real way that through satellites, if we're talking about applying the law, it's gotten to the point now where you can actually pretty much mostly use that to be able to figure out what's going on the ground. We're experimenting with acoustic monitoring in our technology lab at Los Amigos and one of our biological stations and other things. There's camera traps, there's all of those things. But if it's real time and you want to actually apply the law and move quickly for illegal activities, if you can see, within a hectare or much less, trees going down and things happening, that's all you need to move forward. And I think satellites are actually getting us there.
Thank you for that. Another important thing are metrics, right? How do you measure progress? How do you measure getting rid of these problems? Tim, you've been on the ground in Pará for a long time. You've been working with the indigenous communities for a long time as well. Have you seen this progress, and how has this progress evolved?
Yes, well, partly in response to the other speakers, I think I want to warn about too much belief in technology, because the technology is focused on detection, crime detection, to know where it is. And that's not the main problem, because in the technology, the problem is, especially now, because under the current government in Brazil, but also the previous government, law enforcement, environmental law enforcement has experienced severe budget cuts. So the problem is we can detect a lot, but if there's no law enforcement going, we're just watching the deforestation and illegal logging. We're not going to stop it. So, and machines cannot stop deforestation and illegal logging. Satellites can only watch, and they cannot talk, and also drones, they cannot talk. That's also what my indigenous partners say. We'd love to have drones, and we don't have the millions like WF. We just have, let's say, €1,000 a month that we use very effectively. And we always say drones cannot talk. Drones can only observe, but they cannot stop the deforestation. It's people doing the illegal deforestation, and it's other people that have to say on the ground, stop what you're doing there. So you need human action on the ground, and that's what our focus on. We use technology, cheap technology, but I want to stress that it's humans that have to say, stop what you're doing there. You're not allowed here. You're not allowed to cut the tree, that burn that forest. And as environmental law enforcement is much less now, has been diminished over the last years, it's even more important to get forest communities involved. And that's what our partners are doing. Of course, they cannot be 5 or 10. There at least be in indigenous territory, Maro, we now have more than 50 forest guardians. So it's dozens of people who go there because you have to outnumber them, and we have developed a non-confrontational, non-aggressive approach. But I wish to emphasize again, it's humans that have to stop it. So the human action on the ground is really important. Otherwise, we're just watching the destruction and we cannot stop it. So the technology is helpful, of course, but only if it's combined with human action on the ground. It's either from law enforcement or from citizens. And again, the forest guardians are officially registered and they pass on the information, but it's either the citizens, indigenous citizens, forest citizens, or the law enforcement authorities. Otherwise, the technology has no use.
Thank you, Tim. Very valuable. John, go ahead.
Just to add a little bit to what Tim said there. And, there's only two prongs to this, and Tim's already said it. One is the government has to take action. At the end of the day, they're the ones with jurisdiction and the capacity to do that, and people. And the communities that actually can figure out a way to defend themselves better. So I would say that looking at on the people part of this, on communities or indigenous territories or concessionaires or those who we work with, they are basically the constituents of the government, and so based on their capacity to be able to put the legal evidence in front of the government, and for that slew of cases to get to the government, I think that's one way that government actually feels like they need to, they compels them to move forward. We talk a lot about government will, and I totally agree with that. And on government side, though, governments aren't a monolith. I think that there is, departmental level or state level law enforcement, prosecutors, and the rest that function. Sometimes nationally they work. And so there's got to be a concerted effort to continue to move forward with governments to provide them with the capacity, understanding, and this constituency of communities who are providing the legal cases that really pushes the government. So it's kind of both of those that need to happen. One thing on the real-time technology, I think there is a deterrence there. It's much easier, going back to what Tim said, to be able to detect something very quickly where there's only like half a hectare down, there's only a few people there, versus you don't find out for a month, and you go there and there's practically a brand new small village, and it's really hard. Then it gets confrontational. The loggers or the gold miners have already invested equipment and all that, so they're going to defend it more. So I do think there is this, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the whack-a-mole game, but there's kind of a whack-a-mole process there for knocking down these things that come up. And I don't think it's going to go away. It's something that we're just going to have to continue to manage forever. And so I think success needs to be keeping it tamped down.
Thank you, John. Jan Kees, you are currently in Eastern Africa, if I'm right.
Tanzania.
In Tanzania. I think we've been talking quite a bit about the Amazon. I'd love to focus a bit more also in the African work that you're currently doing. And a lot of that goes to working with people as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how that goes, linking with what Tim said a bit earlier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of us understand the importance of technology. Technologies are tools in the hands of people, and people in the end, of course, have to do it. And that's why I launched a kind of provocative question. Is there any hope for criminals? Is there any hope for forest criminals? Because the people, and of course, there's real crime, like killing people. But there's many of them are not real criminals, but law offenders. They break the law. If they here in Africa kill or poach a rhino, in terms of law, they are a thief of a property because the rhino is owned by the government and they steal it. So for stealing, we wouldn't probably say it's criminals. It's maybe criminal, but you've got big ones and smaller ones, right? So framing everything that happens in nature reserves, in Amazon, in the safari as crime is not always very helpful, because many of the people are desperate. They are fishermen and they are out there for fish and they don't really know where else to go, and that's why they do it there. So if you look at the perspective from problem-oriented policing, you take the problem, you place it central, and then look, kind of decompose the problem and also decompose the solution tree. And you can see that often problems are broken down and people are kind of forced in a certain direction because there's no alternative for them. So investing in alternative livelihoods, which are viable, is a very important aspect of managing law enforcement in the area. And of course, you need law enforcement. You need to say, stop, this is where you should, no more cutting, no more poaching, and so on. It has to be there. It's prerequisite, but it's not the only thing to do. And finding and trying to put people behind bars is a very expensive operation, and you probably will never end it. So you cannot solve crime, you can control it. You can try to keep it at a minimum, but it will always be a fight which continues. So if you invest in the community, that's one of the projects I'm working here in Tanzania. It's a project, it's called myplanet.green. It's a very early stages, it's a pilot phase. And it's really a kind of marketplace aimed at trying to find and define what we call positive action, green action, if you like. People have choices. Everyone has choices. The fisherman, the logger, everyone has choices. But if they only have two choices, they will probably take the one which is most profitable for them. So we can try to make, if it's illegal, we can make the balance between profit and risk to be caught. We can try to change that, make it less attractive, or we can try to include or propose, design other types of livelihood. So present them with more options, positive options, green options, which are viable, which do support him or her in their livelihood. So if you look at this marketplace, there's many things that people can do in a positive way that donors all over the world, let's say my neighbor in Amsterdam would like to sponsor for a very little amount, but those little amounts in areas like the Amazon are often huge. They can plant a tree, they can place a fence, a chili fence, to prevent elephants from raiding a farmland. There's so many things. The eco charcoal, you can subsidize it rather than subsidizing the production of corn in the States or in the Netherlands, or the bio-industry in the Netherlands is an example of many different laws and international conventions being broken. If even in a Western land as a country as the Netherlands, we have difficulty by suggesting and proposing people and showing green and sustainable options, then you can imagine in poor countries it's even harder. And I think this model can really work because many people really want to contribute directly to conservation, to positive actions. And the people in the field, the communities that live there, they actually have to do it. They are the powers in place that can be mobilized, and we should find and search for solutions to do that. And of course, it doesn't eradicate the law enforcement. Law enforcement is very important. There's always a few guys that think that if I'm the strongest and nobody stops me, I can take whatever I want. And especially in areas like the Amazon, there are no forces that withhold them. So they feel free to do whatever they like. So you really need law enforcement. It needs to be invested there. But with only law enforcement, you will never manage it. You really have to invest in the other components as well.
Thank you, Jan Kees. I think that is a very good point towards reminding everyone that these projects always need a holistic vision, right? A circular vision, that there's many other factors involved in illegal activities, especially in forest environments. Many of these projects, as we've been mentioning, involve local communities, frontline communities, indigenous communities. All of you work with all of these communities. How do you ensure the safety of these communities whilst working in these programs, right? Especially in lawless pieces of land. I think this is something that has been very relevant for many years, has become relevant over the last couple of weeks. If we watch the news, So I'd like to open that question up to everyone. How do we ensure that? I don't know who
Well,
wants to go first, please.
I can start. I think first of all we cannot be naive. There's no way we can really ensure their safety. And I don't know, maybe for someone that's far away from the Amazon or from the front line, they don't realize that the danger is there already. Either we do it something or nothing. These people are suffering threats to their land, threats by illegal loggers, illegal miners, poachers, wherever. So especially in the Amazon, that's a place I work more closely nowadays, but also in many places of Africa. I was working there before as well. We have these people, like these traditional people, these indigenous people, that oftentimes are already exposed to a lot of risk, either if you work with them or not. So at least the way we approach is that first of all, we only work with communities who ask for our support, so we don't put them in any harm's way if they are not willing to do so. And then we try to bring technology that will at least add some safety to their work and give them more chance to defend themselves. So this goes from many different levels, yeah, from the intelligence level of knowing what's going on, using the satellites to plan things better, but also giving them technology, such as the example I was mentioned before with the drones, that they can stay far away, for instance, 1 kilometer away from an illegal logging site, still send the drone, still capture the coordinates and all the evidence that they need for legal prosecution without any direct confrontation. This also helps. So the other thing we do is to work a lot with them uh, on safeguards and ways to try to reduce and try to patrol with all the safety precautions and all the layers that we can add to that as well. And also we work a lot training communication systems so they can raise alarm bells or ask for help when needed. But unfortunately, as we mentioned before, it's very tough for a lot of those groups nowadays, especially in Brazil. We've seen what happened with Bruno and Dom. They are not the only ones. We have a lot of indigenous defenders that we lost in the last few years. So we had Ariel Reuawau, for instance, that was one in the area that we were working together. We have Paulinho Guajajara, we have Maxel, and a lot of other indigenous people and frontline defenders in Brazil and Latin America that are being killed right now just to try to defend their territory. So we do what we can, bringing all those technologies and also helping them outside of the forest with advocacy, with legal support. But we cannot work, as all my colleagues said, we cannot only count on law enforcement. It's not law enforcement alone that will solve this problem. We have to approach from all different sides. And technology is one thing that can help to their safety. But then we need for the society to realize the rights, to realize how important it is to conserve those areas. And also we need to find ways to generate income because, as some of you mentioned, a lot of those people are just people who have no options, are just people with the socio inequalities that we have in those countries that are pushed to do illegal things sometimes. So we also need to address the social problems and the political problems behind those issues.
Thank you, Felipe. Tim, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, of course, the danger is there. In Pará, I work mostly in Pará, and also we start working in Acre. That's another state of the Brazilian Amazon. But Pará is for over 10 years the leading deforestation state and also one of the most violent states. It's called considered even within the Amazon, the far west. So, and what our one of our main partners is the Chief Dada Borari. He's the General Chief of Maro Indigenous Territory. He has been receiving death threats for over 10 years. He's been kidnapped. They tried to kill him several times. So the threat is really real. But he also managed to get into the human rights program of the Brazilian state. So that means that he has personal police protection. So he moves around with police protection. Sometimes one, sometimes more. I'm not going to give all full details about this, but so we all the time have the threats. But when they patrol, and the indigenous forest guardians, they go, and I repeat that they are officially registered at the federal prosecutor's office and at FUNAI. So they're officially forest guardians of the territory, and legally the outsiders are not allowed inside the indigenous territories, only with permission of the chief. So if outsiders are inside the indigenous territory, without permission, it's illegal. So, but as safety measures, there are spotters, like and the indigenous, of course, are very good in let's say, walking silently through the forest and hide. So there are spotters who go front to see how many people are doing the logging or illegal forest activities. And then at one point they prepare it and they confront the loggers or burning or whatever they're doing. They confront them and tell them to stop. So what is important then, that you make your risk assessment, how many are they? And now they have green shirts, so they can hide better in the forest, but also it shows the unity. They have the same shirts and they step out of the forest and they stop what you're doing. So it's the psychological surprise effect, and they really stop the loggers. So this is kind of confrontational, but with a non-violent, non-confrontational approach. Pictures that they take with the GPS all go to the law enforcement authorities, to the and in Brazil, including the public prosecutors and the federal police, that are non-corrupt institutions. And this is really important because crime prevention, because our main goal is prevention. And now all the logging companies know, these indigenous walking with cameras, they're there. And they know also, this is very important for crime prevention, that the potential perpetrator needs to know that the pictures or the data that they collect will go to the law enforcement authorities. And then only then you have the deterrent effect, deterrence, that they stay away. And so this is very important. And now we have the situation that if the indigenous arrive and there's outsiders, they start running, they run away because they know, these indigenous take pictures. And the pictures will go to the forest law enforcement system. And then your prevention model can work. So it's really important that the potential perpetrators know that there is collaboration between the indigenous forest guardians and the public prosecutor's office, which is non-corrupt. So then, and then so this is the alliance, the law enforcement system and the indigenous forest guardians. And this has a real deterrent effect on the illegal loggers. So this is kind of our model. But of course, it remains difficult, but it kind of works.
John, we don't have that much time, so I'd love to just move on as quickly as possible. But John, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't want to come out as the person sounding pessimistic about this. So that's not the point of my comment here. But going to what Tim and Felipe just said, there's two things here. We're all hoping for a better feeling of rule of law in the frontier, right? And I think once that improves, I think that will help, take care of rights and human life and all of those things. But I do think that we do need to come up with a more concerted strategy. And Tim and Felipe mentioned part of it. One is, I think we have to recognize that the threats are going to be there for quite a long time. They're very direct, and Felipe said it very well. And so there needs to be a new strategy and new money to just make the face-to-face protection of these people happen, right? Tim mentioned, police bodyguards and arrest. I think we're actually getting to that point where there needs to be the money to be able to protect people in that way, in a more strategic way. I think the second one, which I agree wholeheartedly with Tim, I think little by little, and we're seeing some of this progress, I think in Peru, where we've done a lot of this, where the government and communities working together, there's more of a backing of government that, you're not going to get away with it if with threats or killing people or disappearing people in the rest. And I think that needs to continue to grow and strengthen. And I realize, and I know the governments realize, especially the ones in the field, that they feel like there might not be a lot of belief in them, but we've got to really be pushing and supporting, accompanying people and the communities together to really get to that level of protection and reduce the threats there.
Thank you, John. My last question is going to be around the fact, actually about governments. Governments change, they come and go. As you say, the Peruvian government has been collaborating much more in environmental affairs in the last years. The Brazilian government has not, if I may say, to the least. How do you, working, Tim, with prosecutors, with federal government, with local government, Felipe as well, Jan case. How do you flexibilize? How does that work go according to the government that's in power at the time? Because governments come and go, as I said. So how do you adapt to that with your work?
Maybe. Well, I want to emphasize that there's a difference between government and and the justice system. They're different. And we have the separation of power, trias politica of Montesquieu, and so because the governments are not always willing to stop deforestation, sometimes at the local or national level. And I work mostly in Brazil, and for example, and with the law enforcement system and the justice system is independent. Is pretty independent. For example, we tried it also in a scientific project in Colombia. That was much more difficult. In some countries, public prosecutors are under the influence of the government. But in Brazil, not really. I mean, we are really independent. So we are dealing only with the law enforcement system, the justice system, not with the government, because the government is under the influence of agro-business, and the justice system has nothing to do with that, really, or much less than the government. So I think for the analysis, it's really important for any NGO. You have to look which institutions can we work with, and which institutions are free of corruption. And I think of this book, Why Nations Fail. It's really quite an important book, but they say, why are certain countries successful and others aren't? The difference is institutions, inclusive institutions, like the Public Prosecutor's Office. So I think it's very important for NGOs, and I don't want to sound cynical, but many nature NGOs are with biologists, and not to disrespect biologists, but we're talking about crime. So insights of crime science and criminology are really useful. And you have to find the right institutions that can make a difference, that are not corrupt, and that can make a difference. Because if you work with institutions with corruption, it can put the forest guardians in real danger. I know personal people who reported a crime, but they reported the crime to a guy who was actually corrupt, and then the guy can be killed because you're right, he's reporting. And so you have to be careful with which institution and which actors you work with. Otherwise, it's going to be, again, it will people put in more danger. But it is possible, and you have to do this analysis in which country which institutions can be trusted. It's really, for example, with anti-corruption commissions, because we are also talking where deforestation is taking place, are also countries that have a relatively high corruption, not all of them, but some of them. So you really have to take this into account and to make it part of your analysis and your strategy. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add something to that?
Well, I can add some. I partially agree with Tim. I think there are always some institutions that you still can have some dialogue and then tend to be serious. I wouldn't go as far as him to say they're very good and uncorrupted and not political influence, but at least they tend to work and to do the right thing. So we also try to work a lot with those institutions, especially the Public Prosecutor Office, a little bit of the federal police as well to a certain level. But as you know, it's very hard to work with the government in Brazil right now, especially the federal government. And in Latin America, governments are always complex, even good ones sometimes are complex to work. So we also try not to fully rely on the government as well. That's why we work a lot with the indigenous group, but not only the local groups, but the indigenous institutions, COIAB, COICA, all the indigenous organizations, so they can also work independently from the government. And sometimes, like in the current days, the best defense for us sometimes is not to do like a legal case in Brazil, but to take this to a UN summit or to some international event and to do advocacy. And eventually, when the pressure comes from outside, we're having more success than taking the pressure directly to our government. So there's a lot of different strategies. I totally agree with Tim that it cannot be only conservation people looking into that. That's why we have also lawyers and communication and a lot of people who work alongside with us to help with this legal part of the work. And then we also try to work to some of different levels. Some state governments are still open to work. Some municipal governments are open to work. So we look to those other places as well, and empowering the indigenous organizations so they're able to monitor, at least to show to the world what's going on, and when necessary that the government is not acting and doing their job.
Thank you, Felipe. Jan Kees, yeah, go ahead. We just have 2 minutes left, and then I'd like to have a question from the audience. So go ahead.
Just to elaborate a little bit on what Tim and the others are saying, when you talk about institutions, we shouldn't look only at law enforcement institutions. We do have the penal code, and if you did something wrong, you get a penalty. But we also have administrative laws, we have environmental laws, we have food laws, we have economic laws, and agricultural laws. And all these institutions have these laws. If government changes, it might change one or two of these laws, a few of them, but many of these laws will always be there. And many of these organizations are professionals trying to do what is good within their profession. So that's agriculture or water management or wildlife management or food and sustainable food supply or health, then those laws are also important. So if someone is polluting the river with mercury because he's illegally mining for gold, then we can say this is wrong. You get a penalty. You get you go to jail. But we can also say you are violating environmental laws, your environmental health laws, and a few others. So all these can be used and should be used to tackle the problems that we are facing. If you look at places like Brazil, but we have also in the Netherlands, we have tipping points, anonymous tipping points, places where you can give information to the police or to other law enforcement or enforcement authorities to protect your privacy and to protect your name, because it can be very, very dangerous to say something about a drug cartel. You will be dead the next day. So if you can say it in an anonymous way, report it to authorities, then that could also be something that if the authorities don't have it, NGOs or international organizations might step in, and like the Bellingcat organization or organizations like that, they can step in and process this information and share it with the authorities, just protecting the source where it came from, because it could be very, very dangerous to report whatever you see in the field. I think we all agree about that. So just think broader than only police and prosecution. Think holistic.
Thank you, Jan Kees. We'll go straight into questions from the audience. As you can see here, question to the panelists is, what are some of the safeguards applied in doing your work when faced with intimidation and corruption? Anyone?
Well, with the I personally haven't experienced it, the intimidation, and but the indigenous forest guardians, of course, have many times, and Chief Dada has even been kidnapped, and tortured, and so I mean they left him unconscious in the forest, hanging between two trees. So luckily he was found, more prevention. So our keyword is prevention, but it's very important. So the spotters, it's like in a military operation, you have two or several spotters, two or more, who go and who see how many people are there, are they armed, and what kind of weapons do they have, and then corruption. So we have had a case of corruption, like the inspector or chief inspector who happens to be corrupt. But then we also work with the chief public prosecutors and the federal police who do anti-corruption research. And for example, this superintendent who was corrupt, he was later arrested in a big operation of the federal police and the federal prosecutors, and he's been sentenced to prison. So of course we don't wish anyone to go to prison in Brazil, which is horrible. But well, in this case, I mean, he really put somebody in danger, and he was attacked by gunmen. So we rely on, we have to be smart in the forest and work with the trustworthy law enforcement actors when there's real serious intimidation, threat, and corruption. I mean, we have to rely on the rule of law system.
Thank you. John, I'm very sorry we're going to have to end up right here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for bringing your vital experience into this, a fascinating subject. I could honestly stay here for another hour and speak to you all about this. For everyone in the audience, this is also going to be available afterwards if you want to share with friends, colleagues, or family. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.